ask yourself, what was the best-selling game of 1984? What were people playing on at the time? What were the dominating platforms? And what major players of the industry were coming or going? If that's the case, or if you know these answers and you're interested in sharing them with us, welcome. I'm Nick, and this is That Year in Gaming, 1984, for Retro Games with Nick. This is the first video of what I hope to be a long-running series on giving you the broad picture of what the video game industry looked like on a specific year. The way that I'm picking these years early on is starting from 40 years ago. I'm currently recording in March 2024, so that makes it 1984. And then moving from 5 years in 5 years. So my goal for this year, this calendar year, is to cover 1984, 89, 94, 99, and 2004. And again, 2005, 2006-ish is about where our channel stops looking at games, because that's kind of where things stop being retro for me, right? The 360 and PS3 generation really redefined what gaming was like for most people. And so I consider the stuff coming before to be what retro means at this time. And I will also not go any further back than 1984. The Atari 2600, I'm sure, is a fantastic console, and there's lots of fascinating things to discover. But it's just too much for me to wrap my head around, and they're also a lot harder to get back to in terms of games. Whereas, even games from 1984, you can still find some enjoyment of, as we'll see when we go over the list of games published this year. I should say that I'm no expert in the material. As I said in my welcome video to the channel, I'm just a passionate guy that loves video games and loves to learn. And so my goal is to basically go on a Wikipedia deep dive together with the audience. If you know something, or if you have cool links you're willing to share, or if you want to correct me on something I get wrong, fantastic. Please sound off in the comments below. Let me know what happened, let me know what you found or what I got wrong, and I'll be happy to post erratas and sort of have bigger discussions with the community about what happened. I should also warn you that this is actually my second time recording this particular episode. My OBS audio settings had screwed up, and you could only hear me when I spoke above a certain volume, which is not great because there was a lot of sort of talking to myself and understanding the material. On the plus side, it means I kind of know what happened this year in video games, so I won't spend as much time kind of reading to myself and maybe letting you read together with me, and I can just jump straight to commenting on what the Wikipedia article says. Alright, that's the plan, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and start our Wikipedia deep dive of the year 1984. And before we do, we should understand a very important event that happened the year before, which is the video game crash of 1983. In my understanding, which, again, I have not really read much into besides what, a couple of YouTubers that I follow have talked about in series about retro gamings, essentially what happened is that the market was flooded by poor quality third-party cartridges. The prices were driven down by the immense ease that people had to create Atari 2600 cartridges. And the result is that the consumers lost faith in the products and stopped buying altogether. And the revenue peaked at $3.2 billion to then fall around $100 million by 1985. And these are 1983 and 1985 dollars. So it's insane the kind of drop that the industry had in those 2 years. The crash, which was mostly a United States event, marked what people tend to consider the end of the second generation of console video games. So just to dive a little deeper into that, what does the second generation mean? It means the Atari 2600 and 5200. the Magnavox Odyssey 2, the Intellivision, the ColecoVision, the Vectrex. These very basic systems, but that started having cartridge games and being able to, play just more than built-in games, which was the case for the first generation of consoles. Post-crash, the market eventually recovered, with, Nintendo being super cautious with what they were doing, and we got to the third generation, which covered the Nintendo Famicom, or Super Nintendo, and the Sega SG-1000. I believe the Master System, which is the a more advanced version of the SG-1000. It's called the SG-1000 Mark III in Japan. And I guess the Atari 7800 too. These formed the so-called third generation of consoles. So the crash basically literally broke Atari and created the gap between the second to the third generation of consoles. What was happening with PCs at the same time? And the answer is, well, PCs were actually doing just fine. Like, if you want to look and look at the best-selling home systems, interestingly enough, the Famicom is, in fact, the best-selling system, and this is just through Japan. Right? At this time, the NES is not available in the US. It will be published the next year for the Christmas sales. So in Japan only, it sold 2 million, almost 3 million consoles. Most of the other things are PCs, right? There is the Sega SG-1000, which again is Japan only, is listed as 10th in the list, but otherwise we have just a bunch of home PCs of different specs and different kinds. There's the Commodore 64, there's the IBM personal computer, there's the Apple II, and the related Apple Macintosh, which is not the one pictured there. It is this one. So let's spend a minute or two sort of going through each of these and understanding what they are and how they came to be, how old they are at the time, how much they cost, why they're selling so much. So the Commodore 64 was officially introduced in 1982, which means about 2 years before the year that we're looking at. It is the highest selling single computer model of all time, selling about between 12.5 and 17 million units. It sold for $595, which is the equivalent of $1,800 in 2022. And you might think, oh shit, that's really expensive. But again, keep in mind that this is very much a PC equivalent at the time, right? Now, true, you don't necessarily use this for productivity much, but there are some simple programs that you can do. You can code BASIC with it. So there are things you can do with it. So you should not compare this to what you expect a PS5 to cost. You should compare this to what you expect a mid-range PC to cost. And, if you add everything up, you do get close to those $1,500 to $1,800 mark. So the price looks very high when you first look at it, but it's actually not that high if you compare things separately. It is the successor of the VIC-20. It has 64 kilobytes of RAM, hence the name Commodore 64. It dominated the low-end computer market for most of the later years of the 1980s. And in fact, in the period we're looking at, between 83 and 86, it had between 30 and 40% share of the US market, and it sold 2 million units per year, outselling everything else. The UK market was its own beast, as was typically the case for microcomputing, and we'll sort of dig deeper into it as we look at the games. But after the ZX Spectrum, which for Brits is just the personal computer model, bar none, the Commodore 64 still was the second most popular computer. One thing that's very interesting about the Commodore 64 and just the Commodore in general is that they had a lot of vertical integration in their company. They developed their own integrated circuits, they developed their own sound interface for audios. And so, because they had such vertical integration, they were able to streamline the process. That's why they were able to sell the Commodore 64 for what was a, compared to the other players in the market, which we'll talk about in a second, very low price. In fact, and I have to remember where I found the quote. Here. The C64 made an impressive debut at the January 1982 Consumer Electronics Show because all we saw at our booth were Atari people with their mouths dropping open saying, "How can you do that for $595?" And the reason is that Commodore was actually making a hell of a margin on each of these. Because due to their vertical integration, $135 was the cost of manufacturing a single Commodore 64. So now imagine if Sony or Microsoft were making, like, if you compare things, right? It sold for, where was it, $1,800? It cost them $350. Imagine a PS5 making $1,450 each profit for Sony. Like, that's insane. The companies these days just would love to have such margins on the things they do. And that's partly why they were also able to dominate the market by systematically undercutting prices. Because they had $460 margin at the time. And so, they could just be like, oh, yeah, let's just start the prices by $50. Let's just start the price by $100. It's fine. More people will buy it now, and we still make money on each sale. Market war. I'm not gonna go into, if you wish to follow up and read through the page of Commodore 64, you're welcome to do so. But we're gonna sort of stop here, I think, in terms of the Commodore 64 itself. Commodore used BASIC in terms of its language that things were programmed in. Oh, there's the full block diagram of the C64. That's cool. I had actually not gone down the page this much my first run through. Anyway, so Commodore 64, a major player at the time, the dominating force in the US market, pretty cheap, all things considered, and one of the most popular gaming platforms in 1984. Number 2, IBM Personal Computer. The IBM PC is basically the one that set the standard for a lot of modern open architecture. Most contemporary personal computers share architectural features in common with the original IBM PC, including the Macs that were manufactured between 2006 and 2022. So this played actually an immense role in shaping the future of electronics. It also runs BASIC, but also has its own disk operating system. Let's see, what else is interesting about this? It was 2 years old at this point, and it cost $1,565 in 1981 dollars for a 16 kilobyte RAM, color graphics adapter, keyboards, and no disk drives. So you can see how the Commodore 64, which again, actually, when I already forgot, I think the Commodore 64 just launched the following year, right? It launched in 82. Yeah, it launched in 82. So less than a year later, the C64 was selling for basically $1,000 less than the IBM PC. You can understand how it was able to get such a large share of the market. What else? Still, IBM PCs sold very well. I mean, again, they were number three overall selling rate. The Commodore 64 sold 2.5 million, but the IBM PCs, and there's actually multiple SKUs. The original SKU came out in 81, and in 83 there were a couple of refreshers, but they still sold 2 million units, so they were successful. They were just not as cheap as the Commodore 64s. Here are the specs. I remember that one of the interesting bits about the IBM PC is that IBM published complete thorough specifications of the system, bus, and memory map immediately on release, with the idea that this way people could create their own third-party compatible accessories and boost the market that way. And turns out it actually worked. It's kind of like when the PS3s allowed people to just like put Linux on them if they wanted to, and people were like, "Shit, that's cool." It's kind of like a somewhat cheap PC instead of a very expensive console. So it did not come with a mouse by default, but you could get a mouse by using one of the expansion ports. And so in November 18th, 1983, which was the year before, the PC Junior was released. Well, okay, technically it was introduced in 83, but as you can see from the little blur from the page, it was released in March 84. And the portable was the first version of a portable PC, which was interesting. Basically, you can see from the picture, the keyboard kind of just folded back, and there was a tiny ass screen, which is just fascinating to see. The PC Junior released this year. I believe this one also had a mouse. I think I saw a picture or two where it did have a mouse. So this was the big reason for introducing the PC Junior. Up until then, IBM PCs could only output 4 graphics. The PC Junior could output up to 16. Oh. Mentions. Sales were apparently poor. The keyboard, I keep reading, seems to be a big issue, though I'm not entirely sure why. Which eventually cutting prices made it successful. But then the discounts ended, the sales decreased, the inventory began to stack. By this time, 3 PC Junior specific magazines had ended their publications with significant losses. Instead, IBM started selling more of the PC-AT. So this is what ultimately took over the market. So that was the literal PC market so far. What about Apple? So Apple had been on the market for a long time at this point with the Apple II, 1977. And yet, it still sold like gangbusters, like 1 million units this year, for a product that was at this point 7 years old. That's a lot. And that's because, again, the Apple II started selling at a very high cost. Where is it? Where's the data here? It was about in the same range as the IBM PC. And it's probably after 7 years, the costs were low. Oh, I think that's because this is the full Apple II series. I want the actual Apple II. There we go. This is what I'm looking at. So the Apple II was launched in 1977. It was launched at a price of $12.98, which not as much as the IBM PC when it launched. And by the time the Commodore 64 came around, it was probably around at the same price with, price cuts and such. It is considered one of the best personal computers of all time due to its role in popularizing home computing and influencing later software development. If you look at the UI for an Apple II, you kind of recognize all the basics of the modern UIs that we are used to. However, again, at this point, the Apple II is a pretty old computer. What Apple will do this year is actually launch its Macintosh. Again, notice that Apple II, standard version, no mouse. Screen, and keyboard, but no mouse. Macintosh, mouse. This is the year that the default mouse being part of the whole computer starts becoming a dominant thing. So this is the history, the debut. This is look at him. This is a very young Steve Jobs. Lots of hair. That looks like a really shady salesman. I don't trust anything this man is trying to sell me, to be perfectly honest. And so what made the success of the Apple computer is that it had two things that were built into the software. A first version of a Paint-like software, and a Mac Write, which is your basic first version of a WYSIWYG editor, or if you prefer, a Word editor of sorts. And that just meant that everybody with the Macintosh was able to just write things on their computers and share files with other people and even draw on their computer. So that was a very revolutionary thing to happen to the world of personal computing in this year. The launch of the Macintosh also sort of is steeped in history, as we'll see later on. It was one of those. It's the famous ad that spoofs 1984 by George Orwell, because this is the year 1984. Get it? Get it? That recently, a couple of years ago, Epic spoofed having Apple play the role of Big Brother and being like, no, we're the ones that are rebelling against it. And it's like, sure. You're two giant corporations and you're making so much money. Like, what are we even talking about? Anyways, anything else to talk about the Macintosh or the Apple II? I don't think so. There is one last computer, which is not listed here, but just because of the fact that we're looking at best-selling home video games in the United Kingdom, we have to discuss it's the ZX Spectrum. Like we said before, looking at the Commodore 64, the ZX is, for the Brits, the personal computer. It launched at a really cheap price, right? I guess it probably didn't come with a screen. I think it was literally just a keyboard and all the innards were built in. But it just sold gangbusters. It was cheap to make. It was cheap to buy. It was easy to program for. And people in the UK just loved their ZX Spectrums. Here you can see a 90-year-old former British Prime Minister interacting with a dog game or something. I'm really confused as to the reason for this particular picture, but um, so there's some information about the firmware and all, but again, I'm not interested enough in the hardware side of things to speak with any confidence on that. So the ZX Spectrum was originally released by Sinclair Research in 1982, starting at the same time as the Commodore. And eventually, Sinclair was bought by Amstrad, which is another UK-based computing firm. And they kept releasing more ZX Spectrum models up to 1988. In fact, they kept producing them until 1992. And you recognize ZX Spectrum because they look like that. This was the time when, again, the two most common ways to transfer data was either via floppy disks, which were still in their infancy, I want to say. It was not the small diskettes that those of you who remember floppy disks are used to. I think they were still on the bigger side of things. And also, a lot of people still use cassette tapes. Even the Commodore 64, I believe, and feel free to correct me on that if I'm wrong, but I believe Commodore 64 used cassette tapes because they're a magnetic support that can easily be rewritten. So in a way, it made sense that until we were able to miniaturize it to make flash drives, people would be using cassette tapes to record and re-record things. And this is just what any ZX Spectrum game looks like. You've seen them before. Each object can only have one color, and there can be only a certain amount of colors on the screen at a time. So I guess it must have come with a screen, right? Wait, let me go back and read about the release. Visitor's Court. They were late. They did mail order sales before units were ready. I still can't tell. I need to Google this now. Did the ZX Spectrum come with a not keyboard or USB screen? Screen is the word I was looking for. And I guess the answer is not. No original ZX Spectrum computers with built-in screens. You just connected it to an ordinary TV set. Okay, cool. I guess that's also what let them keep the price lower than any of the other competitors that we've seen. Um, and so on the computer, there were various programming language implementations. You could do databases, word processors, spreadsheets, drawing and painting tools, 3D modeling, archaeology software. Wow, that's a wild one. Archaeological site planning tool to run on a 48K ZX Spectrum. Oh, it's doing calculation for you based on how you. Okay, I get now what the purpose is. Mm, all right. Okay. So that's it for a review of hardware available in 1984. Let me close a few extra tabs that we've opened up. The NSC PC, NEC PC88 or PC98, these are Japanese personal computers. The MSX is another Japanese personal computer. Again, I have to put a limit somewhere as to what we cover in this channel. So we are not covering Japanese personal computer games. I'm sure they're fascinating. If you are very passionate about them, feel free to launch your own YouTube channel that is fully dedicated on retro PC for Japanese PC games. But we're going to skip them in the same way that we're going to skip anything that is arcade based. I am not an arcade kid. I've never had a passion for arcades. I My biggest arcade memories are from like the Simpsons arcade game and the very Smells Like games and like Cadillac and Dinosaurs way past the time arcades when they were in like those 40 games in one kind of cabinets that were just emulating old boards. So since I am not an expert, we're just going to ignore anything that is arcade related for the rest of this video and the series, more generally speaking, which is why we completely skipped over the arcade games that were most popular at the time. All right, okay, moving on. So now that we've looked at the best-selling computer hardware and console hardware, but mostly computer, let's also look at the best-selling video games. And for this year, we mostly just have the best-selling home video games in the United Kingdom, for obvious reasons. See Video Market Game Crash. So they are as follows. 9 out of 10 of them are for the ZX Spectrum, once again showing just how popular the console was back in the United Kingdom. And then we have another one for the Commodore 64. So let's run through most of. So of these, before I recorded this video the first time, which again I lost because of audio issues, I only need 2 games, which are Cyberwolf and Jetpack, made by Ultimate Play the Game, or as you might know them in modern days, a Rare Limited. I love Cyberwolf, honestly, mostly because of the Game Boy Advance Cyberwolf game that they published in whatever this was, 2004. So I knew of Cyberwolf. And then, oh, I don't know why. Oh, here, yeah, Cyberwolf. And the other one is Jetpack, which is present as a minigame in Donkey Kong 64. So I've played and I've enjoyed. And you can sort of see, you know, your typical ZX Spectrum coloring artifacts because of how the console was using the color and how it's sort of merging different sprites in one. Okay, so I mean Jetpack, we know what it is. Go play Donkey Kong 64 if you have not, or just go find it somewhere. I'm sure you can easily find it. It's a fun game. It's repetitive, right? You're kind of just the astronaut. You're zooming around. First, you have to assemble your rocket. And then you have to grab a bunch of fuel to fill the rocket, and then you have to leave. And then on the next planet, you rinse and repeat. And it's fine. You know, it's fine. Cyberwolf is Cyberwolf is essentially a maze chase game. So what you have is a giant maze that is, where were it is? It's 256 screens, which are a 16 by 16 grid. And you have to move around the maze looking for pieces of an amulet so that you can ultimately go to the center of the maze and enter in, to me, this is a fascinating thing, enter what is the sequel to the game, which is Underworld. Note that, again, this is a maze chase game, right? This is what the game looks like. It's cute, right? Mounted, there's plants, and they use the red for both the flowers on top of the trees and the tree trunks, and you have wolves, you have spiders, you have weird artifacts. I can't even tell what this thing is supposed to be. Like a giant ant or something? Maybe these are mountains? And you're just moving around and trying to collect these things, and like many British games of the time, it's fucking hard. Because they don't really tell you what to do, they kind of just let you figure it out. What else is there to say about this game? Oh, this is fascinating. Actually, I'd missed this last time. They had already prepared Night Lore, the third game in the Saberman series, in advance of the character introduction in Saber Wolf. And Ultimate withheld Night Lore for about a year because they felt Saber Wolf would not have sold as well once players saw the former's graphical advancements, which is probably fair, as we'll see Night Lore in a second. Well, actually, let's just bump it up right now. The game was difficult and above average priced. Oh, this is a cool quote. Simon Niedenthal used Saber Wolf as an example of games that maximize the limited color palette of 8-bit computers. He described its colors as glowing like stained glass, and the effects of color purity are enhanced by contrast with the black background. This is one of the ZX Spectrum's best games, because back in the day, Rare really knew how to make games. I wonder what element from Saber Wolf appears in Jet Force Gemini. Now again, you finish the game, and then you enter a maze. Or, not a maze, but enter the cave, and you end up in Underworld, which was released on the same year on the ZX Spectrum. Q4 for Saber Wolf was just a general 1984. I think I saw June somewhere else. I noticed that this game is completely fucking different. This is a freaking platformer where you have to, like, you know, collect gems and do that kind of thing. Typical of British gaming. I'm curious about when we'll see Dizzy for the first time. That's probably further on, but... And yeah, this one is not... I guess this one is also very approved. 600 flip screens. Rare just knew how to play that ZX Spectrum and just milk it to the bone. So it looks like the Commodore 64 reviews were a little bit more mixed. We will, I think, computer and video games. I think so. Let me double check again. But I think that is one of the magazines. No, it's Computer Gaming World. That's what I was thinking of. There's a couple of magazines that will start looking in the series where we'll go over page by page, summarizing video game magazines of a certain month, just to see what things were like, boots on the ground. One of those is Computer Gaming Monthly, and and we'll sort of see the evolution of their magazine throughout the years. Underworld was the most simultaneously loved and hated game of its area. Stratospheric level of frustration. Man, I should replay Rare Replay. The ZX Spectrum games in particular, I'm fascinated by um, in Rare Replay. But still, Cyberwolf, Maze Chase, Underworld, uh, platforming where you're sort of invulnerable and you just try to collect gems and shit. Night Lore is the third game in the series. This time, Saberman, or whatever the fuck the character is called. Yeah, Saberman has 40 days to collect objects for the castle and brew a cure to his werewolf curse. And each room is monochrome, but is an isometric 3D, which at the time just blew people's minds away. And it's fascinating, right? If you had never seen something like this before, the idea that you could play in a 3D space, in a space with depth like this, it's fascinating. And it's a very involved game, right? Because, again, British games from the time tend to be. There's a time limit that passes, you have a certain number of lives, you have puzzles to solve, you have ingredients to collect, and I bet that the manual tells you basically jack shit about what to do and how to achieve it. What's fascinating is that the way that they basically build the sting is via a method called image masking, and you're welcome to read more about how they did it by going to the Night Lore page and reading through it. This is probably one of the seminal works in British gaming history and one of the most influential ones for any British developers. Because again, you just did not see things like that at the time, and people loved it. And the isometric perspective inspired so many different games. And once people figure out the trick, and also had better hardware to actually run sprites on top of each other instead of having to hide the sprite silhouette and then fill in the sprite with something else. But still, they created isometric in games, and that's quite the achievement. Though, again, unforgiving gameplay, high difficulty, awkward controls. So it's one of those beautiful games that you look at and you admire. It's what it did for the medium. But then you go play it and you're like, after 5 minutes, I'm kind of gone. So what else is on this best-selling home video games list? We have, in order, Maniac Miner and Jet Set Willy. Attic Attack. Note that Manic Miner is actually on it, both for ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64, which I'd missed last time. Attic Attack is another rare joint. We have Checkered Flag, which is probably just a racing game. And Hunchback by Ocean, which is, I believe, a platformer. Manic Miner, it's a platforming game of sorts. It's the first game in the Miner Willy series, which I'd never heard of before until today. And this is what a screen of it looks like. You can kind of tell what's happening, right? You kind of have to avoid the enemies, grab the keys, move around. There's probably, it looks like there is an air mechanic, so this bar probably goes down as time goes by, and when they hit you, it goes down faster, and if it runs out, you lose your life, kind of thing. Very standard gaming tropes. Um, Being in music is in the hub, Mountain King. This is another thing about British games that I can tell just by the exploration I've done today of these unexpected pages. They used a lot of royalty-free music back in the day, which is fascinating. All right. I don't know that there's a lot else to say about Manic Miner. So we can move on to something that I think needs to be talked about, which is its sequel, Jet Set Willy. So Jet Set Willy is a platform video game originally made for ZX Spectrum. It's the sequel to Manic Miner. It's basically Miner Willy tidies up the mansion after a massive party to get some sleep. Look at the control, and you know, if you told me that this screenshot and the previous screenshot were from the same game, I would have believed you. They're probably just milking it, kind of doing more of the same. Um, they're probably over checking, like at least for a little bit. Ooh, the Atari 8-bit version kind of looks like garbage. But I'm not sure that they're particularly deep. However, let me point your attention to this absolutely horrible cover. Look at this. What in God's name are we looking at? You get a guy that's barfing or drowning in a toilet. It isn't clear. His legs are not bending in the appropriate way. There's clearly something wrong with these legs. He's holding what I assume is a beer, though the image is kind of sort of low quality enough that it's hard to tell. He seems to have tagged the name of the game on the walls of this bathroom. And what I assume is Willy, which, let's zoom in on this beautiful face. Look at that. Long nose, couple of eyes, open mouth, bow tie. Look at this face. This is a man that is like, what the fuck am I doing here? Then cover art. That's enough for me to want to try this game. And then you try it, and you know it looks like this, and then you play it for 5 minutes, and you're probably just like, yeah, it's fine. But this is a flip screen platform game. I've never heard of the term flip screen. I assume it means that this single screen portions, individual tiles in a maze. Yeah. Okay. So the same way that Saber Wolf was, for example. You can explore a dimension. You can move left, right, and jump. Stairs. 60 screens. This is a very British paragraph, which I'm going to read out loud. One of the most bizarrely named rooms in the game is, we must perform our quirk of fleeg. Often version is misspelled, blah, blah, blah. This is a reference to the comic strip Fat Freddy's Cat, a spin-off from the fabulous furry Freak Brothers. In the original comic, the quirk of fleeg was an obscure ritual in a foreign country, required to be performed upon the sight of dead furry animals. What? Okay. The game cannot be completed due to several bugs. Oof, that's rough. It's interesting. This is, I think, the first time that we've seen copy protection so far. A card with 180 color codes was bundled with the cassette. You had to enter one of the codes so the game would start. And the reason why this works is that at the time, home color reproduction was difficult. Oh, I kind of want to see, but I don't want to. Or the letters. Letters. Oh. See, this is why I want to read through the magazines to really just look at what people are selling, what things look like. Hey, Jetson Willie. Games were cheap. There was a lot of ad. Are these just ads still? I think all of these are just ads. There's no editorials. Oh, here we go. Here are letters. It's really the first program is for games. Program only gives the user one go ahead and enter the code if it gets it wrong. Before you load the program, type in code. Huh. Hacking the code early on. Fascinating. Alright. So this was Jet Set Willie. Epic Attack was a game from Rare before the Saberwolf trilogy. You can see the style, right? The sprites are still moving left and right. It's just the views from the top down, so it gives you a little bit of perspective. People had to really work hard to do these things back in the day, which is cool and fascinating. People loved it as they love all these games from Rare back in the time for ZX Spectrum. I don't know if there's much else to say about it. Hunchback, I think it's mostly worth mentioning because of Ocean, which will go out to make a lot of action license games in the 80s and 90s. It folded. Yeah, it folded in 98. Yeah, I made the Batman, RoboCop. Oh, Ubisoft kind of did a, I guess. No, this is not Ubisoft. This is what became Atari after buying the brand. Um, Looks like they got taken over. All right. I did not mean to close that. I hope it was not a super important tab. We'll see. Okay, what else? So we've listed, these were all the top-selling games in the UK from the year. And I would say one thing I'm going to do is start making lists of games that I want to try based on what we go over. Again, because I already recorded this episode before, though I lost it. I already made a list for 1984. I'm going to read it to you once we go through the rest of the page. But it is that I want to try out some of these games to understand, even how they play and not just what they look like. Alright. Major awards of the year. Arcade, we don't care. Load Runner wins Computer Game of the Year. Load Runner we haven't looked at yet, but this is a very famous game. You should know what it looks like. The cover is actually really cool for the BIC20. It's your maze chase. You need to go and grab all the goals. You need to dodge the evil dudes. And what you can do is you can dig a hole that the dudes will fall through and that you might fall through as well, and go through it. The NES version is not great, mostly because you can't see the full screen at once. And it was very popular. Part of the reason why it was popular is that it also had a level editor. And, it became very popular because of the level editor. Actually, wait, they remade it for 2600 last year? Load Runner 2600 2022. Oh. Somebody literally just ported Load Runner to... This is insane. Also, you can tell that somebody's an actual nerd because he writes the Apple II as the Apple brackets. That's nerd shit. Don't do nerd shit. Night Lore takes Game of the Year. It's understandable, again, because of just what it did for the medium. Let's see what happened to the business. What things happened, who bought whom, who merged with whom, and so forth. New companies that were founded, Accolade, which sadly is the company that we owe the Bubsy games to. Which is like, why? Why? Why did you have to do that upon the world? Eventually they were bought by Infogrames. But Jesus, man. Like, did I say Toys for Bob? No. Toys for Bob is 35 years old? I had no idea. They were just in the news because they purchased their independence from Microsoft to avoid getting shut down. And I just knew them from Skylanders onwards. And I had no idea that they were also the Pandemonium devs. Or the Star Control? What is Star Control? We'll get to it eventually. But I had no idea that Toys for Bob was that old. But yeah, like, these guys, Accolade, with games like, what are we looking at? First one is developer, right? Yeah. Thunder, TKO, Card Sharks, you have the Viper, Gunboat, Alter Destiny. Did it not make Bubsy? I thought they made Bubsy. Yeah. It freaking made Bubsy. Freaking Accolade. At least it did not make the worst one, which is Bubsy 3D, but boy. So Accolade was founded in 1984. Oh, Kemco. What does Kemco make? I know they make a lot of stuff, but what did I know them from? Disordered by release, no. Ordered by release date. In Top Gear series. Why would you separate the ports localizations and... Well, whatever. Oh, they did the Shadowgate for an NES. They did a lot of those, Crazy Castle, I think. Um, game. Prehistoric, man. Yeah, Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle. I get 64. Did it shut down? Mm, I'm mostly doing mobile games. Okay. Anyway, Camco founded this year. Um, New World Computing. This is actually important, and I missed it. They are the Might and Magic and Heroes of Might and Magic people. That is big. We're still a few years off. They were founded this year. It's going to be 2 years until they create the first Might and Magic game. But yeah, that's big. Psygnosis. They made the Wipeout game. And they're still, I think they're still, no, they were shut down in 2012. Yeah. But they made mainly the Wipeout game, the Alundra, the game, A Bug's Life. I know was a pretty good one that people remember. Formula One. Yeah, and all the Wipeout games. And from the time they were rebranded as Studio Liverpool, it was just Formula One Wipeout, Formula One Wipeout, Formula One Wipeout, which is a little sad, but it is what it is. Sculpture software. Oh, Sculpture software is what became Acclaim Studios Salt Lake City. Makers of Super Wars are really good games, actually. The SNES Board of Doom, not so much, and the Mortal Kombat reports, yeah, not so much. But yeah, cool. I guess let's go down the list then, because I've been surprised by a couple that I had not noticed. Yeah, no, this doesn't say anything to me. Gremlin. Bought by Infogrames. This is so weird. Like, it... doesn't look like they made any major game, I guess. I guess they made the Premier Manager series for a while. Actua Soccer actually rings a bell. I think these games were popular back in the day, in Europe. They used the motive from the Siegfried Funeral March from Götterdämmerung as introductory music. Boy, those Brits and that royalty-free music, they just really love it, huh? Or does it say successor Sumo Digital? Oh, I guess because the people left and made Sumo Digital. Okay. That's cool. We learned a few studios. Newark Computing. Keep an eye out. Um, Sculpture Software. Just because of the Super Star Wars games. Chemical. I guess we didn't really look at Elite Systems, but I looked at this time last time, and they're not great. I think they were connected to the Elite game, but they're actually not. It's just a coincidence. Five companies went bankrupt or folded. I don't know that any of them really mean anything to us because we did not really look at the previous thing. I guess the company that was making a second generation console for Bali folded. Imagine Software. It was just bought and used by Ocean. Oh, that's cool. Bandersnatch, Black Mirror interactive film, alludes to Imagine Software. Oh, Bandersnatch comes from the name. Huh. I had no idea that Bandersnatch came from a actual game that failed to be produced. Yeah, serious software I've never heard of. And Starpath. Okay. So businesses being created, businesses being absorbed or went bankrupt. Big one. Hasbro buys Milton Bradley. Um, that's a big deal. Not necessarily for video games. I don't know how involved in video games Milton Bradley was at this time. I think they mostly sold the rights to make things. But in terms of just games in general, this is a big acquisition. What else? So Atari is in trouble. In fact, Warner sells. This is the very weird and complicated thing. Um, the arcade games division stays Atari Games and stays in the hands of Warner, but the Atari Inc. Home video game and home computer intellectual properties with the logo and the trademark are sold to Trammell Technology. Oh, this is also funny. It was founded on May 17th, but took on the Atari name less than 2 months later. They're the ones who made 7800, the Lynx, the Jaguar. So, and this is how you track things, and we can always come back to infogrames. Funnily enough, um, Atari sold itself to JTS Corporation, which sold everything to Hasbro, which then Hasbro Interactive itself was then sold to Infogrames. Did it do good things? Who knows? I guess that Digital Eclipse Atari 50 collection was pretty cool, but it's probably the only good thing Atari has made in the last 15 years or so. I guess Sega merged with something else. Mattel is like, I'm out, I'm out, I'm out. Television doesn't work. I'm out. And GameStop is founded, Babbage's, as it was once upon a time known. And 40 years later, it's wobbling. It's holding for now, but honestly, it's not doing so much video games these days as it's doing Funko Pops and shit. And it's always ridiculous how little they give you for your trade-in rentals. Like, worst deal ever. Just trade-in games, period. Alright, one last thing to go over, which are the games themselves. I'll escape the arcade area, as usual. So, computer games that were released in 1984. The Black Onyx in January in Japan, right? Anytime you see a PC and a number, that means it's a Japanese personal computer. This is not something that I'm particularly interested in exploring, but it's your classic dungeon crawler. And I think the important thing that it did is that it influenced Highlight, which came later that year, and was also one of the last games for SG-1000. I guess it came to Europe the next year on MSX. And that's the only version that ever came out. Oh, it also came out on the Famicom in Japan. The year after the SG-1000 and 4 years after the original version. So it's your classic dungeon crawler. Labyrinth, not much to say. Cyberwolf, we talked over. Elite needs to be examined a little bit closer. Elite is another one of those quintessential British computer games. It's your space privateer sandbox modeling game. As far as I understand, because again, I have never played it. But it has an open-ended game model, and it has 3D graphics, which I guess are cool, but they're very, like, this is one of those things where having played No Man's Sky is a little hard. Go back to a very bare bones, the vector graphics, basic, 3D looking space simulation, and go like, oh yeah, it looks good. I'm just like, no, this kind of looks like garbage. Like, it's cool. I'm glad it exists. I don't know that this is a game that I want to play or that I could be able to play 40 years later. But indie, it's one of the longest running video game franchises. Wow. I guess if you exclude Space Invaders and Oregon Trail, because, not really things. Mario and Donkey Kong currently tied for first release and last release are the same. That's kind of funny. Um, like we haven't seen an Elite game in a hot minute. We should be around here. Oh, Elite. Where are you on the list? You're not on the list. Okay. So they list it as one of the longest running video game franchises, but they don't list it on the page. So, A. Really dangerous. I guess Really Dangerous is still going. I don't think it's doing great, but it's still going. And yeah, you can go to planets and fight things and dock and buy stuff and hyperspace jump, and there isn't really a goal. Like, there are some missions here and there, but there's not really a main goal for things. Um, Marketing and release versions, reception. Yeah. So yeah, it's a very important game for the history of gaming, especially in the UK. We'll check it out, maybe, but it's not a game that I'm particularly like, yeah. I mean, even just Wing Commander Privateer, which granted comes 10 years later, is the same thing, a lot better. So, it's just kind of hard to go back to these games. What else? So we got a couple of Japanese role-playing games, Hide Light and Dragon Slayer, which kind of paved the way for what will become The Legend of Zelda. These were only released on Japanese computers, so we're gonna skip them. Deus Ex Machina. This is one that I discovered by going through this. It's fascinating. So this is not a game. It's an interactive experience that's 46 minutes long that you have to watch while you listen to a cassette tape with music and narration that kind of describes the process of what you're looking at. So this is one that I definitely want to stream to just understand what the fuck this actually is. I've discovered this, and this is fascinating to me. So yeah. Next up, Night Lore, we talked about. The Ancient Art of War. This is another. There's a lot of these games that do very unique things. Mostly because, people are still discovering the edges of the business. And they are not fully settled on what the standard genres look like, and they were experimenting with stuff. So this is a battlefield simulation. And basically what you have is a proto-total war, where, according to the description on Wikipedia, you play a skirmish. So it's missing the campaign mode, but you're playing your skirmishes or crafted flag missions. And what you do is you move your units, and anytime you meet an enemy squad, they're frozen in time. And you can choose to either let the computer resolve the fight automatically, or you can zoom into the battle and resolve it, and you're playing at a point sort of a tactical strategy base game. It is fascinating. Somebody basically came up with Total War 40 years ago. So this is one that I definitely want to check out at some point. It's considered as one of the first real-time strategy or real-time tactics game. And it's going to be basically a decade, 8 years before Dune 2 comes out. It's going to be a full decade before the first Warcraft comes out. So it's going to be some time. But yeah, this is definitely one to keep your eye on. Next on the list, we have Karateka. This is, in a way, one of the first beat 'em ups, right? Along with Karate Champ and Yu or Kung Fu, both also released the same year, but both of these arcade games. This is one of the earliest martial arts fighting games. The difference is that this one was for computer. And I'm not going to actually say much about it because there's a full game that's dedicated to this at this point, which is the making of Karateka. That was published last year by Digital Eclipse. So I encourage everybody who's interested in the game, myself included, to check that out instead. The Lords of Midnight. This is one that I realized that I'd seen the screenshots of on Good Little Games, GG.com, thinking like, do I want to buy this? And I was just like, no, that looks terrible. But I'm reading about it, and it seems fascinating. Choose. Would you rather play a point-and-click adventure, or just basically an adventure game? Or would you rather play a war game? What if you could do both at the same time? You start with 4 characters, and you can recruit some more. And you can either play it as a straight adventure game, trying to destroy the Ouse Crown, which is the source of the bad guy's power, or you can just recruit people and create armies and fight them on the battlefield. Or you could do both. And you're like, okay, what does this even look like? Lords of Midnight game. It looks like this. And you look at it and you're like, oh man, this looks like garbage. Right? If you just look at this doesn't really make you want to play it. But knowing what it is, I'm actually a little fascinated. I would love to see what a playthrough of this game looks like. Yeah, so that was Lords of Midnight. It has sequels and stuff, but yeah, this is another one worth keeping your eye on. It made it to BlackBerry for some reason. What are you playing on your BlackBerry? Oh, you know, Lords of Midnight. Infocom released 4 games. These, you know, Infocom, makers of Zork, their text adventures with no graphics for the most part, so you know what to expect. I think it's interesting that they're trying to, you know, have a sci-fi one, a fantasy one, a more, I don't know what this is, one, and a naval aliens death one. So, you know, they're Infocom games. You know what you're getting into if you play them. Impossible Mission. I've seen somebody play the Sega Master System version of this one, and it looks bad. Which is something that it has in common with another game released later that year, Spy vs. Spy. Both of these games are just about going around in rooms, looking through a billion things, hoping you find the one item that you're looking for. And I think that as a concept, that is just terrible. I understand that it's a way to create randomization, right? You cannot, a game like Saberwolf cannot randomize the placement of things because the enemies have to behave in a certain way. Whereas this, you can just be like, oh, you can open this, and then it's just a matter of, you know, if there's like, I don't know, 64 possible bookshelves and something can be hidden in, you just pick 3 random by just reading spots in RAM to figure out which location you pick the numbers from. But still, the concept, the game as a concept, I think is terrible. Like, you have 6 hours of game time to collect 36 puzzle pieces. Every time you die, you lose 10 minutes. The puzzle pieces are assembled in groups of 4. And it's just like, ugh, this is just a lot. Spy versus Spy, same business. And maybe this is because I only played single player. I don't have somebody to play Spy versus Spy with. Maybe back in the day, playing Spy versus Spy with a friend on the computer was the bomb, pun intended. But it just stops being fun like 5 minutes in. It just stops being fun 5 minutes in. So we're definitely not gonna be checking out either of these games. Um, Adventure Construction Set. This is another one that I had no idea existed. Basically, this is kind of like an early version of like an RPG Maker kind of thing, where you can just create your own tile-based graphical adventure games. For example, oh, here's a dungeon with some bookshelves and a skeleton that you can create with custom tiles. Um, and I'm just curious to see what people have created, what you're doing. Um, there's monsters, there's spells, and there was a very funny quote, which is Orson Scott Card. Not a great person, not great views, mostly due to his militant Mormonism. But I love that this guy also was such a nerd. He was like, it was designed by the clutch monster from the nethermost hell, but the game was flexible, and his son was able to create a spell called Summon Duck, which is funny. And I'm curious to see if I guess it's part of a series. It looks like, right? I definitely heard of Pinball Construction Set before. Oh yeah, and it was bad. I see this. This is familiar to me, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was bad. Um, but yeah, this minute we're checking and seeing what people create and if they have shared anything. I would play 3D Amiga version, just because it has two games pre-built instead of one. Uh, Jet and Willy we covered, and especially its beautiful cover art we talked about. The last big release that is fantastic is King's Quest 1. This is the first in the King's Quest games. Um, wait, what's is? Oh, that's funny. Okay, I was like, that's okay. Okay. So Sierra was founded in 1979, um, by Ken Roberta Williams, and they first made a graphic adventure game called Mystery House, and this is recognized as the first adventure game ever made. And I think what's really cool about this is that it also so Roberta basically wrote it and Ken coded it, and it's just really cool. Because there's like dead bodies that start to appear, and this is one that it's earlier than what I said, but I kind of want to try it. Like, this is a 1982 game. I kind of want to see what it looks like. And after that, they moved on. They started doing King's Quest, and from there, it's the rest is history, right? They wait, the first King's Quest was released in. Oh, okay. The proto King's Quest called Wizard and the Princess was in 1980, but the actual King's Quest series started in 1984. And then they followed it up with the Air Quest, the Space Quest, 86, Police Quest, 87, Leisure Suit Larry, which also by them, which is I was not expecting. I guess it was created by a different person, but published by Sierra, which was in 1987. One of my favorites, not Mystery House, one of my favorites, Gabriel Knight. Love the Gabriel Knight games. And Quest for Glory. So we will definitely play through King's Quest 1. That is a guarantee. I don't particularly care to read through the history of Sierra, though. Good memories. Just want to say good memories. And Ken Roberta Williams these days are actually there's a new game that they're making. Oh, they were remaking their very first game, which is Colossal Cave Adventure. Okay. Uh, Dimension X, just another one of those like big 3D chopper slash plane games. Not my jam. Like I'm sure it's great, just not my jam. We have console games to look at. Nothing really in America. Again, Nintendo's only publishing it this time in Japan with the Famicom. Donkey Kong 3, Devil Word, and Balloon Fight and Ice Climber Singular, um, are published this year in Japan. Hero for the Atari 2600 and Pitfall 2 are also published this year. We want to explore them. Again, like I said, I'm not interested in digging further. Technically, it's not further back, but in terms of systems, it is a little bit further back. I guess we could check out Commodore 64 as an Spectrum port of this. I feel like I've seen somebody play this kind of game before. It's kind of like you're spelunking and saving people in there and going through things. I don't think it looks great, but that's because I don't think Atari games look great, period. So I don't know. We'll see. Pitfall 2. Like, if you tell me, is this Pitfall 2 or Pitfall 1, I'm like, I guess it's Pitfall 2 because there's different colors on the sprite of Pitfall Harry. But I also don't think that neither of those is, again, a good game. Everybody has their biases. My bias is that I just can't go back to the first or second generation of games. That's too far back for me. And in terms of major hardware changes, Apple announces its Macintosh, as we mentioned with the whole 1984 Orwell-style commercial. PC Junior was released, though it ultimately was a commercial failure. Atari announces the 7800, but because of all the messy business about them splitting the two parts of the company and having to figure funding and things out, it takes 2 years for them to actually release the console, which is insane if you think about it. And 3 systems get discontinued. These are all victims of the crash: the 5200, the Magnavox Odyssey, and the Vectrex. Are we missing any games from these? Hard to tell. And that is the 1984 video games deep dive of the Wikipedia page. To wrap up the episode, what we're going to do is look at some other pages that I found online that are looking at either top 10s or try to provide some more context. I really didn't find a lot that was a web page as opposed to a YouTube video. I saw a YouTube video by somebody that was 2 hours long that I'm sure has plenty of insight, and I would love to watch it, and I probably will, now that I've recorded this one, but I didn't want it to influence what I would have to say and what I was learning about 1984 in video games. So let's start by looking at GameSpot. This is gaming highlights from 1984, which was posted 10 years ago for the 30-year anniversary of this particular vintage of video games. Atari announces the 7800. We already talked about this. Oh, one detail that we did not get is that the brand name was sold to the ex-head of Commodore after he left the company earlier that year. That's interesting. Only 59 games total for the 7800 over the course of 5 years, which is sad. I mean, it's not Virtual Boy sad, but it's pretty sad. Nintendo was starting to test and tease the NES to American audiences by going to CESs and presenting the Famicom in its latest incarnation. Though they were still looking at more of a computer market, right? You can see a cassette tape reader and a very ZX Spectrum-y kind of thing with joystick and pads. And it's throughout the year that they eventually will settle on a more like the NES like we know it today. A big thing that we did not mention, because technically nobody could publish it yet. 1984 is when Tetris was born. So, happy 40th birthday, Tetris. And if you're curious, and I had never seen it before, this is what Tetris looked like originally. I assume that these Russian sayings, I would guess this means text. Probably move left, move right, move down. Couple of buttons to rotate. One to quit, one to reset. Oh, did I mess with the scale? It's hard to tell. Scale appropriate. I feel like the scale is still too small. I hate when I'm accidentally mess with the scale because I'm forcing to zoom in so that it looks a little better on the recording, but then I have no idea how much I'm actually zoomed in. Elite, we talked about. Dragon Buster is an arcade game that came out this year, which is not particularly great, but has a life bar for the first time ever in the history of video games. So that's interesting. This is also false. Paperboy was not released this year. It was released in 1985. Inxus one we discussed, and R.I.P. Satoru Iwata. 84 is when Balloon Fight was made by HAL, which Satoru Iwata was a coder for. IMDb's top games of 1984. Take it with a grain of salt. Again, some of these are not really games. Like, okay, so Tetris, fine. Not published in the US on the state, but fine, we want to count it. Duck Hunt, again, not a US game at this time, but okay. Ex Machina we talked about. From what I understand, The Last Star Fighter in 84 is the movie. They made an NES game in 1990, loosely based on the movie, but there is no actual game called The Last Starfighter made in 1984. This is already confusing me. Flicky, you're showing the Genesis cartridge for it. Whatever. This is probably the arcade release. Arcade. Number 9, Casino Strip. Strip Poker Laserdisc full motion video game made for arcade machines. The game is extremely rare now. Huh, gee, I wonder why. And then we've seen most of the stuff. This is the Famicom, Arcade, Karateka, Elite. Then you can keep going as long as you want if you want to go down this rabbit hole. We have to stop somewhere. Random Dudes page. Top 10 video games of 1984. It was in the first page of results on Google, it seemed a legit list. I was like, why not? Duck Hunt. Again, not a 1984 game as far as I personally consider it, because it was not published in the US at the time, whatever. Arcade Cabinet 1942, sure. Excite Bike, same issue. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think what was interesting about this page and the reason why I brought it back is it describes that the original packaging included a Don't Panic pin-on button, a packet of pocket fluff, the order for destruction of Arthur Dent's house, the order for destruction of Earth written in Vogon, official microscopic space fleet, peril-sensitive sunglasses, the brochure How Many Times Has This Happened to You, and no tea. And this is so full of inside jokes for people that have read the book that I'm appreciating how much effort Infocom puts in their game. Elite, Karateka, Kung Fu Master, Punch Out, Karate Champ, and Tetris. Karate Champ and Kung Fu Master, again, both are games, and as well as this version of Punch Out, so we're going to ignore them. Yeah, so, ultimately, did we learn a lot from this list? Not really, but good to see some names just keep popping up. And the last resource I wanted to point you to is a broader one, and is one that I can't possibly have vetted. This channel called Old Classic Retro Gaming, which, you know what, I might as well actually follow on my Retro Games with Nick account. But this channel is doing long plays. I have no idea if commented or uncommented of games, so you can sort of see what King's Quest looks like on Apple II. And also they do somewhat long plays, sometimes short plays, of different versions of the game. Like, where is it? Not on the NES, but... for example, bad examples. I think I saw, for example, Karateka is there with 2 versions. You can see various arcade games. And I just really appreciate this person's effort to try and preserve what games look like. There's 231 videos, so we should be... Oh, there's a fan-made game of The Last Starfighter. And also, you can look at the playlist and sort of, read whatever you're interested in, but I think it's cool that somebody's doing this work, and so... It's not gonna work for everything, unfortunately. Our, what was it called? Already forgotten. Jet Set Willy is not present in this this particular playlist. But, if you would like to see what some of the arcade games or console games look like, well, they have you. And that's pretty cool. Alright, yeah. So that's gonna do it for our first episodes. We have learned a bunch about 1984 and video games. I hope I didn't say too many incorrect things in my ramblings for over this, hour and a half. If you spot some errors, first of all, thank you for watching the video. Really appreciate it, as when you start to get a new channel off the ground, getting videos commented on really helps. Make sure to hit the subscribe button as well to stay connected. Feel free to let me know what I got wrong. Post in the comments. We can have a discussion on that. And if it's a big thing that I really got very wrong, I'm happy to make a small errata video to go with it as a companion to discuss the mistakes and the things that I made. In the meantime, thank you for having watched this video. We'll be back with another episode in the series sometime soon. Until next time, you can find me at youtube.com/@retro-gameswithnick, youtube.com/@gameswithnick, with my main channel where more modern games are and modern playthroughs of things are posted. Plenty of stuff already posted there. I spent a good year and a half, just putting a shit ton of stuff there, so feel free to check that out if you've not been there yet. I do have a Twitch channel, twitch.tv/games with Nick. I will try to stream a couple times a week. One day more modern games, one day more retro games to kind of experience both of them together. Feel free to check that out and leave a follow. And until next time, I'm Nick, and let's keep retro playing together.